I get to a point in my interventions where I say, you know, you're an adult, you have a decision to make. And if your decision is you're going to move on your plan, we'll have to accept that. In the meantime, I'm going to work with your family on how do they accept that. And I can't guarantee you things are going to look the way they look prior to this intervention. But if that's a plan you want to make and you want to do, then I would suggest you proceed on that.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Finding New Waters. My name is B. Reeves. I'm the Director of Business Development here at New Waters Recovery in Raleigh, sitting here with our CEO, Justin McClendon. Welcome, Justin. And our very special guest today is Mr. Drew Horowitz of Drew Horowitz and Associates. He is the founder and owner of Drew Horowitz and Associates. Welcome, Drew.
Thanks, man. Happy to be here.
Well, we're glad you're here, and thank you for being here. Out of the gate, I just want to say we've had great experiences working with you. Recently, we just had a super last-minute, complicated transport needed to happen fast and done right, and we exceeded all expectations. So thank you there. Tell us what all do y'all do?
Yeah. So we've been open and operating since the start of 2014, so about 11 years now. And we've over those years kind of dabbled in a few different kind of non-traditional recovery services. And what we find ourselves doing these days are a few services that we just believe we are true professionals and experts at. And so instead of doing 20 different services, we've really focused on a clinical intervention, a complex transport type of case, and companion services for both those with a substance use disorder or a primary mental health disorder. And really just honing in on those three service lines and doing them, with a high level of expertise and confidence and professionalism. And we feel like, we've really gotten to a place where we can deliver a service in a capacity that really helps us stand out, in our industry and just be able to act quickly and in a timely manner and, deliver services that are top notch. So we're grateful for the opportunity to help so many individuals, cross that starting line of recovery and just be part of their story, and also simultaneously be an extension of a family and of a treatment center, and just being part of that family of services is something that, we just pride ourselves on, and we love it. And we just, again, I'm grateful every day that I get to do the work that I get to do.
Awesome. And before we started, we were kind of talking about what we might talk about, and you said you had were the recipient of an intervention at some point. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, in my 20s, I was in New York City, and I was, trying to make a life for myself, and was very caught up in substances, drugs, and alcohol, and very easy in that city to, fall victim to that, and the accessibility and, sort of the acceptance of drugs is very prevalent there. And, I found myself in a situation where, like many of us, just highly dependent, unable to function, and really unable to stop or discontinue or get myself any type of help. So, my family, by the grace of God, realized that this was a situation over their head. They reached out to a professional, and on a morning in January 2008, my father, my brothers, arrived at my apartment in New York City on the Upper West Side, and I knew right away that it was time. It was time for me to do something I couldn't do on my own that I know I needed to do. And that's a lot of what intervention is. People get confused. They think intervention is, we're going to sell them and force them and convince them. But the majority of the time, the people we're interfacing with at that moment are just like me, where it's like, I know this is what I need, but I know for sure I wasn't going to initiate it. And that having these people here provide some clarity and confirmation that now's the time. And so the relief I felt was actually pretty substantial. And, and next thing I know, I'm on a flight and I'm headed to treatment, and the story just keeps getting better, like it does for most of us.
Love it. Yeah. I mean, what you just said about, when I tell my story, I mean, it was about 12 hours from an intervention, and I kind of felt the stark circling, and to borrow a phrase from maybe like the political climate, when we have the people kind of when the jig is up, and it's like a permission structure to
Yeah.
get help, because I didn't
Yeah.
have the capacity, the balls, the courage,
Mm.
to whatever word is, to ask for it.
Sure. Yeah, and that's so common, that's what happens, when you first walk in and you approach the person, I'll sometimes say, do you know why we're here? And they do know why we're there. It's not a surprise, which is good. I'd be nervous if they didn't know why we're there.
Right.
And so they say, yeah. And I say, well, this is, your family reached the point where they just, didn't know how to help you. And so they contacted me, and we're here today, hoping that you'll see there's an opportunity here, and you deserve that. You deserve a better existence. There's a guy in there or a gal in there that, has a better quality of life than this. And we believe you deserve an opportunity for that, isn't it? Because that's something you're willing to consider. And the outcomes are pretty good. If you can deliver that message with kindness and compassion, and not triggering, that addiction that just wants to fight, if you can deliver it in a way that's receivable, the responses are really positive. And the person will oftentimes say, yes, but what about this? What about, they have some standard logistical concerns. And as long as you can kind of work through some of those fears, we're able to navigate people, to get that help. And yeah, it's just an imperative service that sadly has a lot of stigma tied to it, because I think it's misunderstood, and maybe for good reason. There's people that have created other models, or done it in ways that have changed our culture's mindset on it. But a lot of people don't do intervention because they think it's this big dramatic event where we're leveraging somebody for treatment, or forcing their arm, where it's punitive, and really it's nothing like that. So I think getting the message out and making sure people understand that an intervention done, especially with a highly trained, clinical individual, is not going to leave everybody in a worse situation than we did walking in. And so I think
Yeah.
that's a huge message that I always want to portray to the public.
I think you're right, and I could be wrong about this, but I feel like most people, I think of like the show Intervention back in, whenever that was, early 2000s or something like that. I think that's like people's idea of like, yeah, it's like everybody huddles around, everybody, maybe they read letters, but it's like this coercion of like, you have to do this thing now, right? Which would be very scary, I think,
Yeah.
for anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the last thing you want to do is sort of trigger individuals to, we always, to want to fight us. We want individuals who are struggling to realize that we're your ally. Your addiction tells us we're not. That we are your enemy because we're suggesting you get help, but we're not. We are your ally. Your goals are the same goals we have for you. We just see something interfering that's preventing you from getting to your goals. And so as long as it can be done, mutually and with respect, it can be effective. So I think, like, stomping out some of the stigmatizing around intervention. I do a lot of talking about it, just like I'm doing with you guys and with providers, and helping people understand that, we're not going to create this combative, punitive, setting. We're not going to put your family through that.
But I was looking at your website, and you've got, I think, 4 different modalities or models listed. Will you, because our audience, we do have a lot of family members who are that pre-contemplative, somebody needs help, maybe getting to the point where they realize that it's beyond their, out of their purview at this point, and are looking at, kind of making a call to a person like you. What are the differences in the models?
I think it depends on the presentation and acuity of the person who needs help, right? So if this is a person who's able to go to work every day but comes home and drinks a liter of vodka, versus is this a person that's not working and just drinking, sleeping, drinking, sleeping, I think you have two different sort of presentations of individuals. And so it's important for us to consult with the family and figure out what method is going to be more effective. So as much as I love to make suggestions about the methodology, it's really important the family tells us about the characteristics and the personality of the person we're intervening on. Knowing who they are as a person, we depend on them to tell us, if you do this, he or she is gonna, go nuts. If you approach it like this, his personality or her personality is going to be more accepting. So we work with the family, kind of understand the severity. If this is a person that's really, really acute and deep in their substance use, we really have to come in, sort of that sort of surprise-ish model, and let them know, we didn't have a choice. I mean, we could tell you all day that we're talking to professionals and hoping to get you help, but it won't really be effective. So we had to come here today, in somewhat of a crisis, to help you out of this hole you're spinning in. And we really got to pull you out of this before it takes you any further. And so for a situation like that, who's real chronic and acute, we're going to have to do that with someone who might be a little bit, more functional and vocational type of setting, is able to work, is able to engage a bit with the family, but clearly their substance use is interfering with their livelihood and relationships. We might have a spouse or a friend or whatever the relation is to the client, to say, we've reached out, we spoke to a professional, and they offered us some suggestions on, how to enter a conversation with you or talk about the idea of help and what that looks like. Is that something you'd be willing to join with us and jump on a call or have a meeting and just talk about the best way to work on this, because we are struggling. We are really uncertain of how to help you and what to do. And we could really use a third party to kind of guide us a little bit and navigate us through sort of the next steps. And the reality is, more times than not, that person is actually willing to do it. That person actually is willing to enter into a dialogue, into a conversation, and speak to us about, what does this mean? What is treatment? And those are best case scenarios. If the person's unwilling to do that, that actually is okay too, because then we can go in with the traditional model and we can say, we really tried to engage you in this process and have you be part of it, but you declined. And so here we are today, seeing if there's an opportunity, for us to come to an agreement. And again, we had hoped that you'd be involved, but you're not. So again, a lot of this depends on the acuity, the person's willingness to kind of talk about it. But I think what's important is, like, probably similar to how you guys look at treatment, every case has to be looked at on an individual basis. What kind of trauma do they have? What kind of substances are they using? How serious is it? So we really look and determine, the course of action based on that.
Mentioned when you confront somebody, or whether it's invitational or sort of surprise, and then they kind of have that willingness, but then they have roadblocks, or what's the word I'm looking for?
Barriers to treatment.
Barriers. Yeah. What are the common barriers?
Yeah. Work. It's usually always work, or the barrier really is confusion around the illness of addiction, and that the fact that I can stop on my own and I can treat my own situation. And so that's probably the biggest one. Is the first and foremost, the biggest obstacle I ever face, and it's constant, is that they don't disagree that the substance is causing challenges in their life, but they disagree on the recommendation of help. And so we don't, it's rare that I've done an intervention. I can't think of any where the person has flat out said, I don't use, I don't drink, I'm not an alcoholic. I usually what we get is, agree, I could do better without it. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop. And they recommend a lower level of care for themselves. Like, I'm going to see a therapist. And so, and I always say, hey, I appreciate that that you recognize that, and we all agree that there's a common obstacle here in your life. Great. And I also appreciate that you're willing to do something about it. And I'll just say, honestly, based on what I'm hearing from your family, based on your situation, based on what I know as a professional, I have a lot of concerns about that plan working. And here's why. And so, it's a healthy conversation, but it's definitely not a debate. This is not a debate. I get to a point in my interventions where I say, you're an adult, you have a decision to make. And if your decision is you're going to move on your plan, we'll have to accept that. In the meantime, I'm going to work with your family on how do they accept that. And I can't guarantee you things are going to look the way they look prior to this intervention. But if that's a plan you want to make and you want to do, then I would suggest you proceed on that. Your family and I are asking that you consider a higher level of care because we feel like that's what it's going to take for you to really get well. And we don't want to take chances with your life because you're a super important person. And a lot of us depend on you. And every day that you can't be the best version of yourself, we lose out on you. We miss you. Right. So those are the kind of dialogues and comments that I bring to intervention. And every time I challenge somebody's, belief or statement, it's always followed by an empowering statement. I'm saying this because you are such a great person and we miss you. So instead of saying you need help because you're an alcoholic, that's very kind of shame-based and punitive, saying we want you to get well so we can have you in our life. And so that's received a lot better.
Gotcha.
I think this is where families go wrong, right? They just don't know how to word it.
Right.
Interesting. I just did this. I was interviewed by a woman who's a therapist who, it was a kind of a recovery story. And she asked if a family member would tell, the family member, if somebody would tell their side of the story. And my brother did. And she sent me his recording. And one of the things that he said, and I hadn't thought of like this, is when I was in that last, year, really last 3 or 4 months, he said something to her. He said, I told him that he was no longer there anymore and that the person that everybody loved, cool, funny, was gone.
Mhm.
He wasn't as maybe loving in the way he said it to me. I don't even really remember that, but it makes sense that hearing that like the person missed me and that this bee had for the time being vanished. I
Mhm.
think that had a huge effect on me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is way more impactful. And part of the statements we give the families to read, if we are going to read a letter, is drawing the difference between the old healthy version of you and the current version of you. Because for the person in their addiction, that pops out big time because they know in their heart they're not the same person. Right. And so it's a very effective strategy.
I could definitely see what's the saying, you get more with honey than you do with
Vinegar.
I'm butchering that right now, something like that. But as you mentioned before, the addiction wants to fight, right? So if you come in guns ablazing, it's just like, hey, these are all the things that are wrong, and this is what we're going to do about it. Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine how that goes, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's an illness that shames you and belittles you all the time. And, that that's what fuels your continued use. And so what happens is when the families add shame and guilt and blame, all it's going to do is fuel the addiction. And so it's very counterintuitive for them to come in with compassion and empathy and kindness because they're pissed. And so you have to
Right.
coach. Yeah, which is understandable. They're pissed because their loved one isn't able to show up in the manner that they know how they can show up. And so
Right.
they're mad that their husband isn't the husband that they married. And so they're angry. And I get it. But if we want to get him back, we're going to have to treat him with some compassion and empathy. Otherwise, this isn't going to work. And so it's very counterintuitive for them. And I mean, I get a lot of calls from families that say, they're trying to determine, they're contemplative about doing an intervention. And they say, well, I'm going to go talk to him and I'm going to see how it goes and I'll let you know. And I say, okay, that sounds good. And some of them will say, well, how do you think, any advice for me? And I say, well, they are going to say one of two things. And this is almost always the case. When a family approaches somebody who's active in addiction, the person is going to say one or two things. They're going to say, yes, I'm aware of what's happening. Thank you for telling me. I love you, or not, but I am working on it. I'm looking at getting help. I'm going to see a therapist. I'm going to try an AA meeting. They're going to pacify them with some type of verbiage to get them to leave them alone. Or they're going to have the opposite reaction and yell at them and manipulate them with fear and blame. Both strategies are manipulative, and the alcoholic or drug user does it not by training, but by default, right? They're not consciously aware this is what I'm doing, but their addiction teaches them to manipulate in order to sustain their use. So the alcoholic and addicts have no idea that they're manipulating, but they are. And so the family doesn't know what to do because, oh, he's gonna work on it. Great, we're good for now. Or I'm not going to approach him again because he just gets angry. And then they go back to not doing anything. And so then we don't hear from them. And then maybe 6 months later, they call back and say, well, you were right. That's what they did. And, every time we approach him, he gets angry. So we don't think an intervention is a good idea because he's going to get angry. And so families just get caught in this cycle and they can't get out of it, or the person's dabbling a little in recovery, but still using. And so they're kind of content with it. And they're told that's still okay. And so what happens is everyone stays sick. And it's unfortunate because no one's getting the help they need for an active addiction. And so it's just really, we see this constantly. I'm sure you guys see it all the time too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Total crisis. Then everybody's making phone calls. We're trying to, line up, transport interventions. You're getting a plan in place, and they go silent, and then you finally hear from the loved one. He was going to meetings there, and things get better for a little while, then
Yeah.
crisis again. And I think one of the reasons that having a professional is so important is, we hurt the ones we love the most. And that goes for not just the active alcoholic or addict, I think, but also like you said, the family members, they're pissed that this person they married is no longer that husband or wife. And then the addict, I know I was so mean to my immediate family because it was just that, they're probably the closest, they're the biggest threat to my addiction, or were, And so having somebody who has no skin in the game other than to be a non, an objective professional, and you can be the bad guy and the good guy, but not have any kind of skin in the game with one family member or the other.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more, man. It's having that objective third party really helps. Plus, we don't get caught in the chaos and drama and the emotional brawls that they're in. We just cut right through it. And then, like, I've done some of these interventions, and the family's like, Drew, we talked to you 2.5 years ago, and here we are, same exact place, and that intervention was 30 minutes long. And so they're just like, I just wish we had done this sooner, and that's what's bothersome about the world we live in is it's a hard illness, and there's a lot of different advice being thrown at people via the internet, via different professionals with different ideologies, therapists, coaches, treatment center. They talk to a admissions person who doesn't really have too much awareness, who gives them some advice that's like probably not the right advice. And so the families are just taking so much data at one time. They don't know what to do, and so it's a hard place to be a consumer, trying to figure out what to do in this world of our service.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we talk about this all the time, but that's a great point. So it's not only just navigating the conversation, but yeah, having someone in the corner with the family that helps them once there's a yes or a willingness to make a change. Like, okay, well now there's the process of you have to pick a level of care. You got to pick a facility or a treatment modality, and I mean that in itself for a non-informed consumer or family member is a monumental task. I mean, there's just so many resources out there, some good, some bad, some in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. They get on Google and they just go into a hole. And even after they hire us, we start getting text messages. Have you heard of this place? Have you heard of that place?
Right.
Oh my God.
Stay off.
Well, my coworker's brother-in-law
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
okay.
Or my friend's son went to this program, but her friend's son is not it's very different than her son.
Right.
And so it's like we can't just assume that's going to work for him as well. So we get a lot of that, and you just got to gently kind of nudge them back and just say, look, we're gonna look at everything. We're gonna understand what are your financial capabilities. Do we need to look at your insurance, and let's make an informed decision. Because a lot of things we want to do is we want to help families look at this as a 3, 6, 9, 12-month recovery plan. And so, depending on the resources they have, how do we allocate those appropriately to advise them on how to make this work? And so, really trying to be conscientious of that.
Yeah. And that's such an important question to ask families. And it can be a really hard one. And it can come off kind of rude or crass, is just asking about the resources, because the more people like you and the more we know up front about resources, if parents can pay, are they willing to, whatever the case may be, because the last thing you want to do is get down a road when you're kind of test driving a Cadillac when, a Honda Accord is more, in order here. And
Exactly.
yeah,
And we get the same thing on our end where they call us and talk to us, and we'll say, look, I just want to be really transparent. Hiring an advisor and a consultant, it's not an insurance-based covered service. I just want to make sure you're okay. There is fees involved, and kind of giving them a range. We try to get that out a little bit early too, because we don't want them to get 3 hours in with us and realize, hey, we can't retain you. And so really trying to be clear of that. And one of the other things about our industry, and I know you guys know this really well as operators, and I know this, is that there's so much confusion around, money and where to spend it and quality of care and, going to in-network versus out-of-network and all these different options and the cost that addiction takes on families when untreated. So families, will say, well, I don't know if we can afford an intervention, but they are spending loads of money supporting the individual that's not getting help because he's
Yeah.
unemployed, because he can't work, right? And so there's so much like detachment from, the actual reality of the money that it just adds another layer of complexity and challenges to helping people get help.
yeah.
It's very true.
And we've talked almost the whole time about interventions, and you do way more than that. I mean, before I got sober, and then a couple years later started working in this field, I knew what an intervention was, but I certainly never heard of a sober companion or sober transport. And I mean, I would imagine most people listening to this haven't either. So can you kind of talk about what those two things are too?
Yeah. Companion services and transport services are bridge services typically, right? So you have home and treatment, bridge services to help people safely access treatment from home, where they might be willing or sort of willing, and mom or dad or husband or wife don't want to take each other across the country, or drive them 10 hours to treatment. They can hire us as a specialist to provide that transport and make sure that the person is properly cared for, monitored, continue to be evaluated. We ensure, they're not heavily intoxicated, kind of watching the withdrawal symptoms and determining, is this safe or not safe? And so, yeah, making sure people safely get to and from treatment and leaving treatment. Are they transitioning to some type of transitional living? Do they need help getting there? And then the companion services are typically for people that are a little bit more stable, that are looking for kind of somebody, a professional, to be with them for an extended period of time while they handle personal obligations, whether that's work or family, going to weddings, going to, celebratory events, going on business trips, coming home from treatment as an adult who has to go right back to work and can't do transitional living or outpatient, but they can have a live-in companion for 3 or 4 weeks to really provide that accountability and support. And so it's again, it's this kind of unconventional recovery support services that have been created in our industry to help reduce relapse and to keep people on track and maintaining momentum once they've started the process, or helping them start the process.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing that y'all did so well on this recent transport with the primary mental health case. There were medications involved that needed to be safeguarded, monitored, administered, and also the client did not have his driver's license or no ID to get on a plane. And your colleague and employee Sam Hayes said, no problem, we got that, we deal with that. Made sure he got to the airport early. And there's a process, that and to make that happen. And that, I mean, that kind of thing could completely derail somebody's entire treatment episode and possibly recovery journey, period. With that kind of wrinkle in a plan for just, mom and dad trying to get somebody somewhere, and all of a sudden kid can't get on a flight, that could ruin the entire thing, not just the day, but I mean, like the recovery.
Yeah, no, never give up. It's just we can figure it out. Our team can figure it out. I mean, we're determined, it's like, I don't know if there's a case that comes to us that we say no. There's no real obstacle too big for us that we're not going to take. I mean, there's one thing I hate more than anything, it's when providers say no. We can't take that client, or we're not going to accept this. And we work to remove barriers and obstacles to treatment, not add them. Right. So if we can't do it, then nobody can do it. But we have tons of experience navigating TSA and airports and flights and driving people across the country who are vulnerable and making sure people are properly medicated. We have a big infrastructure, and that's why I think we have a lot of success. We have management tiers, and then we have myself, and then we have a medical doctor. So we have a lot of support for our guys and gals on the ground providing services. We have implemented a lot of technology and resources for our team, so that they don't have to say no, so that they don't have to be afraid, so that we're going to do what we got to do to help people get to where they need to get to, right? Because a lot of these cases are super challenging, right? And there's no reason why we can't do it.
That's great. I'll add, you were talking about the, or I will comment on, you were talking about the companion services when someone gets back home. I think that's one important piece that sometimes can really be overlooked. And I mean, just over the years and in my career and also at New Waters, I mean, I've seen so many people that, maybe this has shown up in different ways, but maybe they've been to treatment 2 or 3 times. And, it's wound up being that missing piece that, like, making that transition from treatment back to home is such a huge area of vulnerability. And just having that little bit of just additional assistance when you get back home to just help you acclimate to the environment, make sure you're going to get to the meetings or do the things that you need to do to make sure you get to that first therapy session, whatever it is, can really smooth the landing for that person. And I've seen it just make such a massive difference in the past.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we just recently had a case, probably a 64-year-old female, chronic alcoholic. I mean, went to treatment 14, 15 times. The best programs in the country. Best programs in the country can't help you when you're at home.
That's right.
They can only do so much, and they can only do so much if you don't follow their aftercare recommendations. But this lady had like a small amount of willingness and allowed our team to live with her post-treatment. And, as you would imagine, given, the quality of her treatment and having someone who's trained living with her, we're obviously seeing the outcome is much better. Now we're transitioning out, so we're not there every day. We're there every couple days. And, she's having success for the first time. And some of that came down to her willingness to actually do what she needed to do. But, I'm so happy the treatment center came up with this idea, because so many times it doesn't get recommended, especially if someone has the ability to have that service. It's like, why not throw it out there? And so it could have been the difference in whether or not this lady lived or not. And so
Yeah.
it's a invaluable service. And we also get those calls when clients are in treatment centers and they're kind of too acute to be there. And the treatment center feels like they missed some stuff on the admission screen, and they bring them in, and a day later they're like, we can't do this. And so we'll get the call to come get them. And then our team will work with them to kind of regulate them a bit more, stabilize them a little bit, and then either look to readmit or go elsewhere.
Yeah, that's actually I've not heard of that being a piece of that service. That's really good to know.
Yeah.
And I was gonna say, I mean, there's so many great reasons for this. And again, the person definitely needs to be able to have the resources to do it. But situations when somebody comes back to, especially we had a guy one time who had gone to a really good treatment center after being at New Waters for detox and an assessment, and he went to further treatment. And he had kind of recently moved to this pretty small town in North Carolina where there are not tons of resources and meetings and stuff. And he had a companion there for a little while. And the thing is, get home, and if people don't get engaged in recovery right away, chances aren't good. We know that there aren't good, by the numbers anyway, but if they don't get engaged right away, but with somebody there to kind of, if nothing else, just be there as an accountability partner to just know what you're doing, or more importantly, not doing, and then you go and then you start getting comfortable and acclimated, meet some people in recovery, start feeling better, and it's not so weird going to those churches or wherever you're going. And then all of a sudden, you're doing it, but without that, I don't know if this guy
Yeah.
would have really set foot into a meeting,
Mhm.
basically.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, absolutely. There's a lot of fear involved in it and a lot of hesitation, and you're vulnerable, you're nervous, you're anxious, you're probably a little socially awkward when you're first sober. So, if you don't have kind of a group, then having that companion can make the difference. And so, yeah, I would agree with you. It can be a game. The interesting thing is, like, we talk about having the resources, and like we talk about how much it costs for a person to continue to cycle in and out of recovery. And I'm not talking just about the financial cost. I'm talking about the emotional cost on the family and on the friends and on that individual. And it's amazing how many times we'll get a call and saying, look, the family doesn't have a lot of financial resources, but they are literally dying emotionally. And they find a way to pull together some money, and we put an end to the cycle. And it was the greatest investment they could have ever made, because had they not, they were all going to be unemployed because they couldn't handle the stress from that. So, oftentimes when we look at addiction and mental health untreated, think about the parents that are falling apart. Their marriage is falling apart. They're not being able to work at a high level. Their other children don't want to talk to them because of the way they're handling this. So, by not making an investment, even if it's a little bit of a stretch, you're going to have further financial cost. And so there's a lot of things families don't look at, when you really peel that onion and to see, how does this really impact us, right? What is the cost of me and my wife divorcing, my other kids not talking to me because I'm not handling my son's addiction correctly? It's like, in that
That's
case,
such a great point.
it is
Yeah.
worth it to spend 5 grand and do
Yeah.
this 10 grand, like, because I'm
Yeah.
going to save all these other things. So we try to have that dialogue with them about, like, what is this really costing you? In all facets, not just the dollar value, but emotionally, and relationship wise, what is the cost if your son or daughter continues to use? And then they can see, okay, this does make sense to make this investment.
Yeah. That's such a great point. I'm glad you clarified that. So we talked about interventions, we talked about transport, we talked about companions. What else do y'all do?
We do some consulting and guidance, for, people that, are trying to navigate the steps of this process. I think that's mainly handled by me and one other of my colleagues here. And it's more of a willing participant who is trying to decipher and decide, what is this going to look like for me? Where am I going to go? And it's usually a collaborative process done with the family and the individual. And yeah, or an employer and their employee. And so really just getting involved and figuring out, what do you think they need? Do they need kind of an advisor guide with them? It's sort of a modified case management, but a little different. Just sort of, kind of having a partner guide, there to support you. But like I said at the beginning, we really stick to the 3 services we're good at. We don't really dive deep into family work. We don't have long-term case management. We really stick to these 3 services because we know we deliver them exceptionally. And I've always been hesitant to start doing things that I just wasn't sure, we could properly handle. And so we really have the right team to do intervention. I mean, we do about 270 interventions a year as a company. Yeah, and we could have 3 or 4 or 5 companions going at one time. So, we're a very busy, high volume provider.
I appreciate what you said at the beginning too. You kind of looked at what all everybody's doing and found these things that you do well and are confident and not trying to do too much, because we see it all the time where people get spread too thinly and become a jack of all trades and master of none.
Right. I mean, we refer to family recovery specialists that work with families on this topic. I could certainly do it, but I don't, so we have a few organizations we refer to for families. And then if the client needs like a long-term case manager, we have a few people we know in the industry that we trust. But yeah, I mean, we believe in do what you do well. And if you don't, refer it out to people that do, and just be a team.
Awesome. Well, on that note, how do people find you, Drew, and Drew Horowitz and Associates?
The best thing to do is our website, drewhorowitzassociates.com. You can look at staff, you can look at services, you can submit a web inquiry. We get them right away. So I would advise, if you want to learn more, we do consultations all the time. There's no cost. It's good. It's no pressure. It's not high sales. Here's what we do. If you need us, let us know. If you want to talk through options, happy to do that. But we're based in Minneapolis and Florida, West Palm Beach and Minneapolis. We have 2 staff in Los Angeles. We have 1 staff in Texas, so we are pretty accessible. We can move pretty quickly.
Yeah,
That's great.
you sure can. We've seen it. Well, Drew, thank you so much for being here today. That was very enlightening about the ins and outs of intervention, and thank you for all that you do. And we love working with you. So thank you.
Likewise,
Yeah,
man.
thank you,
Appreciate
dude.
both of you guys.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Drew.
Yeah, thank you very much. Have a great day.
If you liked what you heard today or just want to know more, give us a call on 919-670-8119 or visit us at newwatersrecovery.com. Thank you.